A little early here. Welcome. Welcome to my classroom. This is so much better than a real classroom, at least for now. Wait a few minutes here. I'm going to go into the next part, page 79, the greatest tennis book ever. Page 79, last one I did, page 74 to 73 to 78. And maybe next week I'll continue from where I left off next weekend, possibly. Next weekend, I'm going to be at a tennis tournament. So I'll probably be bored if I'm not tired enough. If I'm not that tired, I'll do the next, I'll do something else on the road, maybe next Sunday. Sunday is usually a good day to do something like this. But here we go. We're looking at the systematization of technique training. The stages just presented with their particular objectives are the basis for an attempt to systematize technique training in a new way, from which to draw conclusions for praxis and establish training suggestions. Figure 57 shows an overview of the new systematization. Shinborn, I think it's Shinborn, 1995. It originated from suggestions from the models of K. Roth and K. Wilamidzik, 1991. This table will be described and explained step by step in the following sections. And I'm going to post, if I don't do it tonight, this just came to me. If I don't do it tonight, I'll do it hopefully tomorrow. I'm going to post a presentation that this guy who wrote this book did. It's a short presentation, but this is all I have. This is the only video I have of the author of this book presenting a small part of this book. So hopefully I'll post that. Here's the table he's talking about that he's going to get into here. I don't know if you can see that. You can pause it if you want to take a look at it. So kind of everything I went over in the last video, he tries to break it down and how it's all combined in like a table or a graph. First stage, technique acquisition training, learning. This begins with the learning of tennis techniques, left side of the table. This involves the systematic formation of so-called engrams of the tennis technique skills. This is, above all, a neurophysiological process in which the so-called motor memory in the movement center of the brain is formed. Here's the definition of an engram. Neurophysiological process. So he's alluding to the fact that this is a brain issue. An engram is a permanent trace of a neurophysiological process in the cerebral cortex. It is the product of the memory capacity of neuronal structures, which consists of so-called interneuronal connections by which bundles of nerve cells are connected to synapses. This happens by regular repetition of the same stimuli, learning, practicing. A piece of information, for example, training stimulus, is initially stored in the form of a rotating excitement in a space-time ordered pattern as a dynamic engram. This rotating excitement leads finally to structural changes in the corresponding synapses, and thereby to a consolidation to a structural engram. Contents of the memory can then be recalled by the activation of this synapse. And then he lists, that's from a book, Schmidt, 1976, see figure 58. That's figure 58. So I always look at this from the perspective of getting it wrong at this point. At this point in my YouTube career. At some point I might become more positive and really build up how this is done step by step in a video format. But at this point I'm more negative or more critical of other people. And there's a good reason for that. See, this can be done the opposite way as well. So you imagine the coach is teaching technique for the sake of teaching technique. You're building up, you have a piece of information that this player is taking in, and it's stored as a dynamic engram. And then the coach repeats it over and over and over again. So maybe, for example, let's use an example would be you're learning the two-handed backhand, let's say. Or the player has a two-handed backhand, you're doing some two-handed backhand practice, the coach is feeding the balls right off the bat. Feeding the balls is the player is building these dynamic engrams off a ball that they'll almost never see. That's the first thing. So even if the player is, even if the coach is using that situation to form the technique, let's say backhand again, and the coach is feeding a slow ball to the player. And then the player has a backhand that maybe looks like, I'm thinking of like a Zverev. And the coach is even teaching racket head above the ball. Because again, reminds me of the USTA. This is how the USTA, if you go through their, at least this is how it used to be. If you go through their red ball, orange ball training, they want this done. They are suggesting that this should be done before the player hits the green stage. And that is racket head above the ball, two-handed backhand, and you're going to come through, rotate through, topspin the ball. Now, let's imagine you're getting a slow ball. Player's getting a slow ball off a feed, and he's learning that. He's playing that, repeating it over and over again. And then he goes out and plays, a month later, 2 months later, after this has been stored. And now it's a permanent, as he calls, a structural engram, permanent engram in the brain. And he gets a ball hit at him that's hit very fast, low over the net, like a laser. And he tries to do this technique that he's used to, and he fails. And he fails again, and he doesn't know why. And now you have to go back. The coach has to go back and relearn the whole fucking thing, or make more changes, and it's just essentially confusing the brain when it could have all been integrated in the beginning. Now I think the coach could be doing that maybe off of feed, feeding different balls. So it's not, but it's just one example. And before I move on, I want to look at what this book that's recommended here with this quote here. I love how people pop in. I don't know if they're from YouTube search, and they just probably like, what the fuck is this? I thought I was clicking on tennis. I thought this was a tennis video. Schmidt, the schema. Oh, this one's in English. The schema as a solution to some persistent problems in motor learning theory. Oh, because this isn't even a tennis book. I'll have to look that one up. We gotta get some German. We gotta get some German speakers out there to translate some of his books. That'd be interesting. So I guess kind of like to sum that up, you don't really want to try and establish these engrams before they're ready. And I talk a lot about this is complicated. I talk about this before. And you can't really get it wrong. You're less likely to get it wrong if you delay what most people are doing. You have a player that's been playing for a while and you think they're ready to um, maybe take the example that I thought. You think that the racket head above the ball is the way to play a backhand. You think they're ready to learn this. You think it's good for them, it's for them, etc. You're better off to delay that as long as possible, which is very problematic when you have people watching you, expecting you to do something, i.e., you're a paid coach at a club and you have parents watching you, expecting you to do things. I've lost clients because I told them that there's nothing else I can do right now. And then they're wondering, why am I coming to you? Why am I continuing to pay me money? Well, then don't pay me money. Get the hell out of here. It's ridiculous. I mean, worried about $20? No, I'm not worried about your fucking $20. And that's what happens. I've even had coaches run me out of a job because the parents went to them and then they came to me and said people are complaining. This is a whole nother video. This I can get it. This is actually reminds me of a whole nother video of how dumb people are in business. They think they're smart, but they're not. So, continuing on here. Accordingly, the objective of the whole learning process is to establish disturbance-resistant engrams, stable basic technique patterns, and to obtain long-term information storage in the central nervous system, which enables a stroke to be played completely automatically without thinking. To establish disturbance-resistant. See, a lot of players will have disturbance-resistant technique in a rally. So if you think of these 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds that can rally all day long, and they look good. They look good in their little situation with their little buddies, and all of them learn this way. It's like a pervasive thing across the USTA when you have all of these kids learning the same way, because all the coaches are learning from the USTA and the USPTA, etc. And they look good, and everyone thinks that they're good. Then they get out there and play a real player, and they get their ass kicked because they don't have disturbance-resistant engrams when it comes to playing the game. Only playing the game the way they want to play the game. That's how they have this. That's how they're disturbance-resistant. And if you put them on, you take a 10-year-old who has this and you put them on an orange court, they can't play. Oh, it's the ball, it's the court. I don't want to do it. It's because you learned them properly. I'm sorry that you learned them properly. But don't blame it on the system because the system's good. You don't want to adapt. At this point, it is necessary to explain the difference between the trace changing theory, hitherto predominantly used in the learning phase, and the much more effective and stable engram theory. So we have the trace changing theory, which states that the technique should initially be learned in a rough form and subsequently be refined to stabilization. Kuhn, 1984. In other words, the acquired memory traces are continuously corrected. This has not proved to be very effective in practice, as every mistake has to be unlearned, which is not without difficulties. What does this remind you of? This reminds me of the Club Pro. Constantly correcting the mistakes, getting the form in a rough form, and then going from there. And what do I say? I can teach form in a matter of minutes if the player is prepared. through going through this real technique learning process. This, what they're talking about here, you think of the technique should initially be learned in a rough form. So as long as the back to in a backhand, as long as that racket head's above the racket and it's somewhat roughly looks correct, and they're making the ball sometimes, it looks good sometimes, etc. We'll continuously work with that and then correct the form. So it's like we start with this 8-year-old who doesn't have the potential to do it right now, to do anything the coach is teaching them, and we'll slowly refine that over the next 3 years. And again, I think they can partially get away with it because of the way players play, and typically juniors are weak. They're usually weak at asserting themselves. And, before the age of 13, 14. So they're not really going to take advantage of the lack of understanding or the instability of the player's technique. This is from a book, Kuhn, 1984. This is a real thing. People actually, that's in German too. People actually do this. I can show you videos. I can bring up videos where there's clubs that they film. They take a player and they'll say, oh, he or she is she's on the high performance track. So she's going to take lessons every week with this pro, and that's going to be our main priority, that lesson. And they filmed it, and you can see them in a rough form, and I've seen them play, and they look amazing. If you don't really know what you're looking at, they look amazing when they turn 13, 14. And then they drop out a year later. Who knows what happened? It didn't even matter. In the end, it didn't even matter. And it's another reason why people can get away with it, because these players, these kids, you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know where they're going to be in 10 years, 5 years, 2 years. The engram theory is based on the concept that motor learning contents are first stored in the form of a dynamic engram, a still unstable memory trace. After a few similar repetitions, it is converted into a static engram, which is then stable. So first, we have the motor learning contents are stored as a dynamic engram. That's the idea. I'm interpreting that as the idea of free play, the idea of mastering these coordination games, mastering mini tennis. Who cares what it looks like as long as they're successful? Because when you say, well, when you don't care what it looks like, aren't you establishing bad habits? No, because there is no repetition. There's no repetition of one thing. The players, think of playing mini tennis, right? Ball goes in, cross court. Next ball, player does a backspin. Next ball does a cross court topspin. Next ball does a drop shot. Next ball, he's at the net. There's nothing being repeated. If anything, the repetition is the change, that's what you want. That's how many times you look at players as they get older that go through this trace changing theory. You want them to mix it up, and they can't. So nothing is being repeated in the motor learning stage. So we have an unstable memory trace. After a few similar repetitions, so if we do some repetition after we go through all that, it's converted into a static engram, which is then stable. See, now we can stabilize. As I say, I can do this in a matter of minutes if they're well prepared. And this could be the kid too that comes in the tennis court that has a lot of sporting background, that maybe has played some form of mini tennis in his basement with his brother, hitting a ball over a net or something. Who knows? They come in, and this is the quote unquote talented athlete. I mean, I do think you can be talented too, but oftentimes it's the talented athlete who's had is just, born to play sports. They play a bunch of sports, and they come in, oh, I can work with this guy. Yeah, because he's been through a motor learning program. called baseball, basketball, football, hockey, and soccer, whether in the backyard, in the street, in the gym, in the school, organized, etc. I tried to do this. I had a parent say to me one time, "Oh, we're not ready to join a tennis academy." I was like, "This ain't a tennis academy, a fucking tennis academy. You think this is a tennis academy? Man, the standards are low around here. Super." So I was getting punished. I was getting punished for doing the right thing. The theory has proved, Engram theory has proved in practice to be the much more effective alternative and is nowadays preferred by many experts and the author of this book. Now, the importance of the simultaneous development of technical and conditioning skills has already been emphasized a few times. This means that parallel with the technique learning process, the areas presented on the right of the table in Figure 57 under the heading Supplementary Training must also be integrated into training. So what's in the supplementary box here is creation of tactical and conditioning preconditions in relaxed conditions and with specific loads. Apart from the correct methodical procedure, which will be described later. So he's going to get into the actual methodical procedure. And you know what? For the people that can't stick around through this or get to that part, well, I mean, fuck it. You don't deserve this knowledge. That's the way I look at it. I'm not trying to make money or make $1 million off this. I kind of like I'm drawn to the idea if you can't sit through this and get to the gold, well then it's not for you. You're not gonna get this anyway by just getting the 1, 2, 3. So there will be, which will be described later, the methodical procedure. In this phase, above all, the coordination and speed areas must be increased intensively, not only off the court, but on the court in combination with ball and racket. There's a video he has labeled coordination training. And then he cites the books that I talk about speed training in tennis. So we're slowly or progressively increasing the intensity of these games and drills. You can even think of the mini tennis game, right? It starts off, you see these players, they're playing. I could show you a video. I have a video of these girls. One girl, the other one I didn't really get to see much later, but the one I worked with specifically, she was absolutely amazing. And it looks like total chaos, these two girls rallying. And, that's a coordination exercise. It's slow. It's not intense. It's fun. Come out the next week, it's a little better. Come out the next week, it's a little better. Not saying anything, not doing anything, just kind of guiding the process, letting them play out maybe different games, different rules, etc. And then 6 months later, the intensity of the game increases. Now they're rallying back and forth super fast. Before it was slow pace, now it's like a super fast pace. And if you think they can do it, and they're not, and they're ready for it, you make rules. You make rules like, okay, you guys are lobbing the ball. You're used to just lobbing the ball. Well, here's one of the rules we're going to make. You got to hit the ball low over the net just for this game. Or you can make up a better rule than that to get them to hit at a fast rally. Or another one I used to do was I would say, you got 30 seconds to hit as many balls over the net as you can. That's a better one. How many balls? And you have two teams going at each other. Which team can hit the most balls over the net in a row? You need to have at least a 3-ball rally for it to count or something like that. And then you have them keeping score with some score thing. And then the intensity increases. And that's how you will increase the intensity through a game for a child or even a teenager. At the same time, following the correct I can't get that word. At the same time, following the correct methodological procedure, the third area is also automatically incorporated: the development of perception, anticipation, decision making, and concentration, and thereby the development of the intuitive game. So you can see by even just the example that I gave, they're intuitively learning perception, anticipation, decision making, concentration, and the development of the intuitive game just by doing what I just described there. And another thing I want to point out is it's not really in this, it might be in this book. Actually, I think it is a little bit, definitely in some other books, especially when we look at child development. A lot of them don't, especially the good ones, especially the really good ones that have serious potential, they don't want to listen to you. They don't want to sit there and have you tell them what to do. So you got to be more clever. They want to play games. They're smart. They're smarter than you. Oftentimes, these kids are smarter than the coaches. They might not be information smart, but they're intelligent. Their future self is way more intelligent than the coach. As we shall see, we proceed systematically, simultaneously down both sides towards the middle. The formation of desired final technique should not be started at the beginning, but instead the greatest problem beginners face, the handling difficulties in relation to the racket and ball, should be tackled by means of dynamic coordination drills, as they are, above all, a matter of coordination, not only the feeling for the ball in general, but rather the feeling for the body and movement as the basic learning precondition, and especially the most important part of the tennis stroke. And he quotes Holtz, A. Holtz, 1995. And especially the most important part of the tennis stroke, which is the point of contact, are the central task. Since exercises should be carried out in and out of movement, they develop whole body movement and above all footwork and balance. Again, parts of coordination ability. It's interesting here, you'll see older players, like they have no sense of their body. And no wonder, because they never played mini tennis. They never took the time in a slower, less intense format to notice how their body's moving when they play. You see like older players being told to bend their knees and shit. Like, put the kids in a short tennis game and they'll realize real fast what bending in your knees feels like. Why should they bend their knees in a full court game? They don't need to. Again, it goes back to just because you told me to. Now there's scores of people that will do things just because you tell them to do. But like I said, you want good players? You want to get the real good ones? They're not going to listen to you. They're going to think for themselves. And he talks about the point of contact. Often you see advanced players have no understanding or real control over the point of contact. So why are we, these are things that children and beginners can master. They can learn about the point of contact, especially on a slower, less intense game with like the red ball and stuff. They can learn the angles and really get a feel for it. Technique learning equals coordination learning plus movement learning. We can therefore state that following formula: technique learning equals coordination learning plus movement learning. Whereby the emphasis is on coordination learning, which is the basis of a precondition for the motor learning process. The whole technique development must thus be understood as a systematic, demand-specific optimization of movement coordination. Nitsch, Mutzer, 1991, which is why they should be trained right from the start, as shown in Figure 59. Now, what's also interesting is that there's so many books, German books, that I don't have because I don't have a German. If you're German out there and you want to, what am I thinking? Interpret these books. Let me know. Hook up with me. I can't do this right. This is the chart on page 59 he's talking about. So it's like another graph, and this is where we're going to get into. This is where he gets into the methodical process right now. Now, even will be in the fourth stage. There's 3 stages before the formation of final technique. Someone just popped in. We're talking about the greatest tennis book ever. Feel free to comment in the chat if you have any questions. Yeah, there's 3 stages before the formation of the final technique. And he's going to get into actual points here. At the 4th stage, there's 20 specific points of how to develop the final technique. And the graph here, much as what I talk about, lists the movement coordination in the beginning, should be task-oriented, dealing with the racket and the ball, and then gets into short tennis, task-oriented, task-oriented. Can you hit the ball here? Can you hit the ball there? Can you do this? Can you do that? With the ball as if you're playing tennis. Then it goes into mini tennis, still task-oriented, movement-oriented. And it adds anticipation, decision-making, concentration ability. And then it gets into technique learning. Formation of Ingrams, action flexibility. So then here we see that the fourth stage is when we're going to start to try and establish the Ingrams, but with action flexibility. And then it goes into the 5th stage, technique acquisition training. Still mentions that it's task-oriented. And then technique application training, complex training, task-oriented, virtuosity. So every one of these stages includes task-oriented. And when you work with these kids too, they like a challenge. They like, especially the competitive ones. Can you do this? I bet you can't do this. Can you do it better than me? Can you do it better than so-and-so? 1st stage, coordination development. The 1st stage is extraordinarily important for children, especially but not exclusively. They should learn to control the racket and ball by playing. So important for children, but not exclusively. So adults can be put through the 1st stage as well. They should learn to control the racket and ball by playing. And this is where quick start, play and stay comes into play. They have to be playing. As in soccer, street soccer in Europe, beach soccer, for example, in the famous Copacabana in Rio, street basketball and street tennis in the USA, the fun of competition with the racket and ball, an opponent, partner, and the natural urge to play should be emphasized as a motivation. This is also where I get into the lack of mini courts that there are. I mean, the kids go in these big courts and they play on the big court because that's what's there. They think that's what's for them. If there's no mini courts, why would they go? Why would they make the game smaller? One should never forget that tennis is a game with the confrontation of 2 opponents, the competition as a focal point. It is precisely these 2 facts which are too often ignored when coaching beginners. Doesn't matter if the player says or has no intention of competing. It still needs to be done this way. The emphasis doesn't have to be on competition. It can be on cooperation at first. You don't need to keep score. You don't need to focus on losing and winning. The game can still be played. In the traditional coaching methods, from the start, the player is too static and is not taught how to move to hit the ball and how to move within the stroke action. The beginners must often break down the shot, play with an already brought back arm, and hit a ball dropped from the other hand called a standing or dead ball, whereby the stroke is limited to an arm movement only. Technically, that's a serve. They would be learning a serve. The all-important whole body movement and coordination, and also the unity and reciprocal action are also completely ignored. In addition, the natural urge to move is repressed and the movement theory is turned on its head. These methods belong in the waste paper basket. They are not only outdated, they are simply wrong. Right from the start, the playful element and the principle of unity and of reciprocal effect should dominate. The body and movement awareness should be trained and developed. Now, sometimes the kids are that bad or they're that stubborn. They don't like to run. You can make really small courts. How small? I mean, you can use your imagination. They can be really small. I mean, the smallest court you can make is just hitting the ball up and down. And maybe that's the kind of games they have to play. I mean, in my club, especially when we're talking about 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 4-year-olds, there's so many things you have to do, and you would do stations before they get to a point where they're rallying back and forth. And all these kids that you see, I say, are stubborn, that don't want to do this, don't want to do that. They're usually giving you a clue that they're not good enough. It's not always just that they're stubborn. They're not good enough, and you're making it too hard. And people will look at some of the games. There's some of the things that I would do, and they say, no, they can do it. They can do it. That's not no. And it's like you're not listening to the kid. The kid is telling you that they can't do it, and coaches and adults, etc., will make fun of the kids essentially. And it doesn't matter if you think they can do it and they are being stubborn or resisting. They're mentally telling you that they don't want to do it. That's good enough, because he also talks about at this age, when we get in this first stage, they should be allowed to do what they want to do. Especially when we're talking about 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, they should be free, because especially 4-year-olds, they want to do what they want to do, and it's really hard to get them to do what you want them to do. So why not let them do what they want to do? There's plenty of time. Of course, in some cases, one must sometimes use the so-called divide learning method. It should only be considered if the learner has great problems with the whole movement awareness, or if existing bad habits must be removed. You're better off just ignoring that whole paragraph. A coach is better off ignoring that whole paragraph, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to fuck it up. Otherwise, the holistic learning method should be the focal point. I'm going to see, I might want to skip ahead for a second and see what some of these exercises, because what he does is he skips ahead to page 166 after he goes through all of this and then some nutrition stuff. He skips ahead to exercise and training forms on page 166, because I'm not going to read the rest of this. I'm going to stop at 86 because I can already tell I'm too tired. So he skips ahead, gets into exercises, and there's pictures. Exercises with ball in hand. And there's nothing really crazy in here. Like, there's so much more you can do. This is like traditional basic stuff, all kinds of ball bouncing. And that's what I talk about with like stations. I would have kids bouncing big light balls with their hands, because they can't do it with the racket. They can do it with the racket fine, but they can't dribble. So why not do some dribbling and then do some tennis dribbling too? Because the reality is, where they're at is with their hand. A lot of the stuff, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, they're at a place where they should be doing tennis stuff with their hands, not even a racket. Some of the easier ones, they can use the racket. And then a paddle. That's where I talk a lot about. Been talking a lot about pickleball. A paddle is the next stage, where like something you put on your hand would be like the next stage before a racket, before a mini racket. So you would have a lot of this stuff. Maybe you use a paddle that's going to allow them, because they're not strong enough to use a racket, that's going to give them better control and feel more confident with the paddle. Bouncing against the ground from different heights, different body positions, different speeds. I had a girl, she was 8. She started at 7 or 8, and until she was 9, let's just say 7 to 9. She was coming once a week, sometimes twice a week. And with, summers off maybe, or 2 months off. And the bouncing up and down with the racket in the air and the dribbling, she did this as at least a part-time exercise for a year or more. And by the time she got so good at it that she could hit 100 in a row. She could hit 200. She could go over 100 easily. And she loved it. And that paid off because when she was it was a game that she was mastering. But she was still doing other things too. That was just one of the exercises that she did when she came in. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. How many can you do in a row? Using the palm of the hand, the back of the hand. Then it gets into throwing, all kinds of throwing. Children throwing the ball to targets. You could do hitting against the wall. Like throwing and catching the racket. Again, these are very basic. Between the legs. I tried to do between the legs once with a girl that was a beginner because she could do it. And she was like 7 years old, and they literally quit the next day. It's apparently that was inappropriate for a 7-year-old girl, I guess. I don't know. They didn't tell me that. They just left and went to a different coach. That's another thing people won't do. Sometimes people won't tell you. They'll just go somewhere else. And there's like 30 exercises here. And something, last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to end up here on page 85, continue here again on page 86. I just watched Ryan Colby. Again, I'm going to giving the good stuff out for the people who are here to the end. I just watched Ryan Colby play. He made it to the finals of that Metzger tournament that I put out there. He beat Jesse Witten. Of course, Jesse Witten's fucking amazing. But this, he's in his 40s. This Colby kid's like 24. Played for USC. Now he plays for Georgia. You could say he's a futures level player. Still learning. And before the match, what was he doing? He was with his coach, and he was throwing and catching 2 balls with his coach, doing these exercises that are the first stage. And he's Ryan Colby right before a match. Because they know how important, and it was just a warm-up. You could say it's just a warm-up exercise, but they understand. They understand how important that exercise and how important it is even at an advanced level. Most people watching this don't understand that still. They won't ever understand that. And good. More money for us who take this information and actually apply it to prize money tennis someday, in this life or the next. So, hope you enjoyed this part 2. Hopefully next week I'll do part 3, and we'll continue on with this book study of the greatest tennis book of all time.